so you must
Starting
love
the
one another.
recording so that we don't miss anything more here for you guys.
Hello? What was that?
Brian, it's all right.
Hi, Brian.
Sorry, guys, we were trying to get your recording going. Sorry about that.
That's okay. Welcome. Thanks for helping. Okay.
No problem. Sorry for the interruption.
No worries. Let's see. I'll read that again. It says, as I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples. And that's so true. It's sometimes it's easier said than done, right?
Mhm.
Especially when we've been hurt. But we can't let ourselves off the hook, so to speak. We are commanded by Jesus to love one another. And I think for me, that means whatever it takes. If I need to talk, which is hard for me, I think for a lot of men, it's hard to even figure out what I'm feeling sometimes. And then to try to translate how I'm feeling or put it into words can be frightening. So my go-to response usually is avoiding or pulling back or trying to stuff it under the rug and really not resolving. So that's not loving Maureen. When I do that, that's not loving her. And I'm commanded by Jesus to love her. She's going to read now the beginning paragraph in the first chapter of week 3 out of Steve's book. This topic is called mutuality.
One another relationships are dynamic, interdependent relationships built on mutual respect, influence, service, encouragement, and trust. Jesus said that we need relationships like this to live well. Love is action. Love sometimes causes great joy, sometimes pain, but always strength. Jesus's love, agape love, is sacrificial love in sincere service of others. Jesus loved people easily, generously, and with his whole heart. He modeled living a life of love. Friendship to Jesus was an adventure, wonderful, meaningful, and worth everything.
Thanks, Maureen. So Steve kind of breaks it down, one another relationships, into several components here. Dynamic, which I think to me means it's something that's changing, something that's evolving. Influential, I think that can mean several things. To me, it kind of means being able to persuade or be persuaded, and maybe even the result of that being your example is influencing someone else's behavior. They're watching you and they're modeling your behavior because it's a winsome thing. It's a positive thing. Service, I think we know what service is. Encouragement, I think we know what encouragement is. Mutual respect, we're actually going to talk about in a different lesson. I think Korean, the painters are doing that week. And the last two he mentions are trust, or two of the ones he mentions are trust and interdependence. And that's what Maureen and I are going to talk about tonight, because I think trust, I think we all know what that is, but it's such a foundational piece to any relationship. Think about any relationship any of us have ever had in our lives that really mattered to us. And I think one of the most important parts of that is trust. Building trust. If you've done something to weaken that trust or harm that trust, working to get it back. Because trust is kind of earned, right? It's not something that we easily give, but it's something that we need to give if we're going to have a good, healthy relationship. So trust, defined, is a reliance, a confidence, a hope in something or someone. And you think about all the things in life that we trust every day. You know, I was teasing Felipe earlier, but I trust that when the electrician put the wires in my house and I turn the button on, the switch, I'm not going to get a shock. I trust the electrician that he did his job, but I have no idea if he did or not. I'm just trusting that he did. That's just one example of trust. Maureen, my wife, is now going to share about trust.
I do want to give just a little disclaimer, however, before I jump into my sharing. So I don't know those of you who know me, and I don't get to teach very often, but this is very nerve-wracking for me. So just so you know the process, I have about 16 pages of notes without exaggeration.
Yep.
They've all been changed several times over the last few days.
Yep.
And I'm going to present the best that I can. But something that helped me with this, I thought of it today, was our son, Matt, which most of you know, he's like, what, in his mid-30s now? The first time he shared in front of the church, I want to say it was a communion. I think he might have been a teen or very early campus. I remember on the way to church, I said to him, Matt, are you nervous? And he said, no, I'm just going to be sharing to a bunch of people who love me. And I thought, oh, I have to remember that, you know, we're all brothers and sisters, and you're going to give me some grace if I mess up or I don't go by my notes. And you can always go like this if it's, 9 o'clock and I'm still chattering. Okay, so here we go on trust. So when I think of trust, I think of it definitely as being earned, but I also think of it as being tested. And over the years, my trust has been tested, my trust in God, as well as my trust in Paul. I think basically I'm a trusting person. I've always had a lot of friends and family around me that I trusted, but and for the most part, I trust Paul, but not blindly. And I wanted to share with you just a time in our life. It wasn't that long ago, actually, where I felt like my trust in both God and Paul were really tested. In about 2008, we decided to do a little family business. Paul's always had an entrepreneurial spirit that I've tried to support over the years. We've looked into different avenues to help him do that, like buying a restaurant. It never happened. And this is an embroidery business that he investigated and did a lot of research about for probably a couple of years at least. Really well thought out with a business plan. We even took a trip to Florida with a brother that we love very much, who was thinking about maybe joining us and didn't. Probably he's glad he didn't at this point, to see another embroidery business and kind of tap into what they had done. So really a lot of praying, a lot of advice. I trusted so much that decision that Paul was making. However, it was very nerve-wracking to me, and I had to really pray to God to really trust that we could pull this off. We were still both working. We had to invest a lot of our time and probably all of our money, our savings, our 401k, everything went into this business. So we were in it, but we were in it together. I at no point felt like Paul was doing anything without including me in on it, which really helped me with my trust. But I know that I had tears in my eyes when I prayed to God to help me stay strong and steady and really follow the course to help this be successful. So the big commitment that we made to each other as well, to do it as a team. We turned the garage into a embroidery production room. We hired staff. We had an embroiderer who was experienced. We had a salesperson. We had a part-time bookkeeper. We put a lot of stuff out there. But we really trusted that God was going to bless all this, because we felt along the way we could feel his presence, and we prayed continually about it. And our first year was actually pretty successful. We made a profit and we built a business, some customers and some schools. We were doing embroidery for some school teams, and it was really kind of exciting. And then 2009 hit. And if you remember, it was the recession. And those customers that we built that we were hoping would be return customers the next year didn't return, because those were the things they were cutting back on, right? The sweatshirts with all the logos. I think our only return customer really was Teen Camp. 2 years in a row, we did the Teen Camp sweatshirts, which I was thankful for. But during that time, it was very nerve-wracking. It was hard work, but we could see that it was also not gonna work. We had to come to the conclusion together with tears that we had just invested a lot of money. When do we pull the plug? All along, though, this was holding each other's hand and learning to trust each other and trust God with every decision that we made. We were at the brink of literally bankruptcy. We went and saw our bankruptcy lawyer. We had our house that we thought we were going to have to mortgage it off and get rid of it. We went with tears to see the lawyer, took all the information, continued to pray, got lots of advice. God actually provided a budget coach for us. Gary Orr had won a contest at work or somewhere where we got a free consultation with a budget coach. No one we'd ever heard of, no one in the church. And he gave it to us, just, hey, why don't you take it? We're not going to use it. And we went and saw this woman who has continued to walk through our budget with us. She really got us back on track. Again, praying through the whole thing. She heard our story. I think she probably thought we were crazy for doing what we did, but she could also hear in us that we were committed to doing it right and giving up if we had to and listening to the signs from God. So we learned so much through that. We worked together to get out of that hole. We still see that budget coach, every once in a while anyway, to help us keep on track. So it was a very humbling time. But we feel like Satan could have taken it in one direction. It really could have destroyed my faith and Paul especially, but in God, and put a real wedge in our marriage. I think that's really what he tried to do, was destroy us from that way. It's such an emotional time. But we didn't. Sometimes you hear that phrase, hindsight is 20/20. You look back on things, and we probably would have done things a lot differently. Some would have said it wasn't a wise investment. Maybe financially, it wasn't, if we look back on it. But what we gained was invaluable. Our relationship with God just grew. We had to trust in him. We could feel him on every turn, every day. We woke up and just saw him, almost literally walking with us. We grew in our trust for each other. We learned how to communicate. We learned how to get mad at the situation and resolve it. We learned how to be open and vulnerable with others in our life of just what we were going through. And it really helped me see that God does have a great plan for us. He has a plan for our future. At 65, I'm not worried about what's going to happen at 75. We don't really have our retirement completed again. We're working on it, but we're not back where we were. But I do know after that experience that God will be with us and he will provide. And at 75 and 85, we'll be fine. I don't know what it looks like because you can't see the future. That's not 20/20 vision, right? But I do know, and I do trust God and my husband.
Yeah, those were some harrowing times. I'm sure we've all been through some type of financial struggle at some point along the way. So that's one struggle. And Maureen and I both had to learn to trust each other and trust God that he would bring us through it. With me, I think an example for me would be when we first got married. I was in the restaurant business. I was a waiter, and I went back to school, and we moved to Boston. And I was concerned about my own character because I was in a business that I loved. I love hospitality. Unfortunately, it's kind of this own little counterculture, if you will, if you do it full time. It's a lot of night hours, a lot of weekends, and there's a lot of partying and stuff that goes on after hours outside of work that's really harmful. And I was concerned that our marriage would not be successful because of my own character and because of the type of work I was doing. So I can remember walking to Suffolk University up on Beacon Hill and just trying to find God, trying to find the truth, because I knew God would help me in my marriage, but I didn't feel close to God. And I guess the point of that being dealing with my own character flaws led me to God, because I was afraid that our marriage would be a train wreck because of me. And at least I had the common sense, wisdom, whatever you want to call it, to be honest with myself and see, I need help. I can't do this on my own. I don't want to have unsuccessful marriage. I want to stay married and have a family and, do what it takes. So that was a good thing that I was afraid of myself. I guess that was the truth. I was afraid of myself that I would ruin our marriage, and that led me to God. So I'm thankful that all of that happened, obviously, because we've been married now for 40 years, and God has done amazing things. The second concept we want to talk about is interdependence. And some of you have maybe never heard of that. Some of you know very well what it is. I think of interdependence as, building a team. And it fits in nicely with the class in terms of mutuality, because I think when I think of mutuality, I think of teamwork. And basically, when I think of interdependence, it's easier for me to think of what it's not. Interdependence is not independence. Independence is about me. Interdependence is not dependence. Dependence is about you or me being dependent upon you. And do those two work in real life? Yes, you can be dependent and you can be independent and still be successful. But I think when we look at the concept of interdependent is really about we. And there's so many good things that come out of a team, right? I think most of us have seen, looking at Greg's Buffalo Bills shirt right now, thinking, okay, that's a team. It's a team I don't like, but it's a team. And, football is a pretty good example of how, a group of guys have to get together and figure things out as a team, because if they don't, they lose. So to me, that's what interdependence is. It's Maureen and I working together as a team. And Maureen is going to share again about interdependence.
So last week we talked a lot about foundation and building our foundation, right? And looking back at that time that Paul was talking about when we first became Christians, and we learned a lot then. And I want to share some of the nuggets, some of the things that we learned along the way in our young years. So you heard about some of the stuff with custom threads in our older years. Now we'll go back in time a little bit. But when I think of interdependency, I even Googled it. One of the definitions is mutual dependence, and also defined as being open to being influenced by someone else, where independence is the exact opposite. So you think as disciples, really being an independent disciple is probably not part of God's plan if we're not going to be influenced by him, right? It also is relying on each other. And in the early years in the kingdom and in our marriage, it was really a training ground when I look back on it, for not just our relationship with God, but definitely for that, but also for our marriage and learning how to work together as a team and how to be united spiritually as well as emotionally. The church was young, our marriage was young, and so were we, believe it or not. We were young. We were in our late 20s. Our schedules were full and our responsibilities were enormous. We were busy from morning till night. I was working full-time as a nurse at Mass Ioneer. Paul was a full-time student at Suffolk University and working at the Ritz-Carlton. We became members of the church when I was baptized. I was pregnant with Matt. So the babies were on their way and they seemed to come one right after another, or so it seemed during then. So our life was a whirlwind. We were leading a Bible talk. So in the early days of the church, it was a campus ministry. So the vision was for everybody to lead. And one of the expectations or standards, if you will, was in order to lead a Bible talk, it was expected that you would be personally fruitful, which would mean you met someone, studied the Bible with them all the way through, and they became a disciple, which that's great, but that's very challenging. Paul was fortunate enough that shortly after he was baptized, he He influenced a man at the Ritz-Carlton, Ted Goodenough, remember Ted and Lynn?
Mhm.
And we studied the Bible with them. They became Christians. So guess what? We got to lead a Bible talk. I don't think we were ready to, but we met the standard, or the expectation, I should say. So we willingly, very willingly, led a Bible talk that quickly grew. It was the beginning of the married ministry in Boston, because mostly everybody was campus, but that Bible talk grew to a house church of 40 marrieds that we were leading. Still pregnant, having babies every minute, so it seemed. Of course, they were spaced out, but it seemed like it was every minute something was happening. Still working full time, still going to school, still doing everything. It was exciting personally and spiritually. We got caught up in it all, but it had its sets of challenges as well. And lots of times we were like ships in the night. Paul would walk through the door and I'd hand him a baby, and then I'd get on the T and go into work, and then I'd come home and Paul would leave for school. And it was just that was just what our life was like. So if it was not for God being part of our lives, I'm so thankful we became Christians at that time. I think we would have failed in so many areas. It's scary to even look back on that. Felt like God was testing our faith and making us rely on him, so that because we were both pretty independent, he was really teaching us how to be interdependent. We were both stretched and often strained. We were discipled often and loudly on our schedules in our marriage. Just about every week we talked about our schedules, what was happening, where we were going, what we were doing. At one point, I remember talking to the ministry leader who was discipling us. Actually, it was Russ Ewell was discipling Paul. Russ was single. We were married. He was discipling Paul. And his partner in the ministry was Janet Vesey, and she was discipling me. And I remember getting with Janet in tears. She was looking at my schedule, and it turned out I was discipling 7 women. And I just said, well, this is what I do. I get with this one and that one. And then before I go to work, I go here. And then when I get home, and then I have lunch with this one and that. She said, Maureen, you're discipling more women than I am, and I'm in the full-time ministry. Stop. Let's relook at this. I mean, lots of practical advice to just kind of keep up with things. So I appreciate all of that. We're also, so that was helping us build the foundation of just how to lead, right? Get a lot of advice on that and how we could lead together. Paul had his set of challenges as well. But our marriage was also being built at that time. We were still fairly new into our marriage. And we were developing habits that weren't that great, like being ships in the night, right? Not being able to really have any quality time. So we got a lot of discipling very early on in our marriage too. And we benefited so much from that. So many of our discipling relationships and others around us have given us nuggets that we continue to remember and bring into our relationship. As we continue to serve in the kingdom, we also continue to need help balancing life. One of the nuggets that I think about all the time, I remember in tears, most of our discipling times we were in tears, even Paul, because we were so overwhelmed at times. The person discipling me, I believe it was Janet, but it could have been Russ, I don't remember now exactly, said, you don't see it now, but you will be able to help so many people in the future. And I remember them saying that, and it didn't comfort me. I know they were trying to, but it was like, I just want to get through today. I don't really care about helping somebody in the future. Who's going to help me now? But I think I look back on that though, and it's true. And, you know, we want to pass on to others what we've been blessed with and what we've learned. It reminded me, we were also always being reminded to keep our priorities straight. God and the kingdom, marriage and family. And how do you do that? It's much easier said than done. We got lots of advice, lots of tears, lots of prayers. That our habit of praying together started very young. So our disciplers were always asking us, have you prayed? Have you prayed? Have you prayed together? Do you pray for Paul separately? Paul, are you praying for Maureen? You know, it really helped us in our foundation to be grounded in our relationship with God. Helped us to make kingdom decisions with our time and our finances. Another nugget that very early on, and people who know us know that we continue with this, is our dates. So because we were ships in the night, and because we very rarely had any extra money, our disciplers have helped us to be very creative with just having that special time. So we committed very early on in our relationship to weekly dates. And that looks different for everybody. For us, we love to eat out, but our budget didn't always allow that. I think of one date in particular, in Weymouth, the kids were little. I want to say Matthew was probably 7 or 8, which would have made Megan about 5 and Mara about 3. And we were living in Weymouth. We shut the door, put them to bed a little early, then shut the door to our dining room at that time that had a glass door on it. And we put some music on and we made a nice dinner and we were dancing in the living room and we looked at the glass door and there was Matt's face. And then right below that was Megan's face. And then right below that was Mara's face watching us dance. And they talk about that today. Matt's what, 38 and Mara's well in her 30s and Megan's, they remember that time. And they didn't begrudge that we put them to bed early. They kind of liked the idea that they could come down and watch us with our dates. So we try to pass on that to the people that we have influence on in marriages to just protect that time. You know, it's so important. I think the busier we are, the more important it is and the harder it is to fit that in. Another nugget from a discipler, Jim Condon, who was an elder at that time, used to talk to us a lot about, you know, if your marriage is off, everything else will be. Like that needs to be a priority. And we were young, so I appreciate that we started out realizing that because we wouldn't have learned that on our own. And it's true. You know, if you think about it, I know with Paul and I in the past, if we're not clicking and we're not getting it with the kids either. Our communication isn't clicking with them. It's not clicking with, you know, the people around us, our ministry or Bible talk. We just like, something's bothering. I know I don't even sleep well. If Paul and I aren't on the same page, I wake up restless and anxious. And that just rings true. We've got to protect our times together. And I think those have helped us over the years to learn how to just work as a team and to continually pray. I love to hear Paul's heart. It just helps me feel secure in my relationship with him, but also my relationship with God when I hear him confessing and being vulnerable and asking God for help in areas in our own marriage or in our lives or things he's struggling with at work that he didn't really even share. And it bonds us. I love to hear that. And then I can pray for him as well. I know that, you know, I babbled a lot and I talked kind of fast. So, and at any time off this class during the week, if you want to call me, I'd love to talk to you more about anything. If you have questions, I want to share some stories. I want to even just pray together. If anybody, any of the women would like to do that, I'd be more than happy to do that. And one thing that I wanted to say was that, you know, sometimes over the years, I felt guilty with just everything going on, you know, trying to do what's right and just praying. I hope my priorities are right. I hope I'm not neglecting the kids. There were so many times that the kids were with babysitters so that we could go to meetings and we could, you know, counsel other people and have discipling times. And I look back on that time and the kids are good. The kids are good. You know, I've asked them, even as adults, did that really bother you? Do you remember back when we were, and they'll say, no, it was great. It was fine. It was fun. And so I think, you know, that guilt is what Satan wants us to feel in our relationships. And we feel like we're not giving enough to our spouse when we're stretched in so many directions. And definitely taking the time to regroup, take a step back. I'm not saying everybody needs to plow through like we did. Looking back on it, we would do it very differently. The church is at a very different spot now. It's more mature. We don't run in a campus ministry like we did then. So I did want to just express that, but just trusting God with that and building the foundation so that you can weather the storms together. You know, life doesn't always get easier. You don't know what's around the corner. So that's what I wanted to share. Thank you for listening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think just to put it in perspective, you have to remember that way back when the church was sending out mission teams, right? So a lot of, you might be thinking, well, Paul and Maureen, what in the world are you doing leading 40 people, a 40-person house church? That's like a small church. Mm-hmm. Well, a lot of that was because of what I would call gap leadership. We were sending out so many people so often that people like us were asked to take on more. And of course, you want to do that. You want to do as much as you can, but you know, you also have to be wise in terms of, okay, I don't want this to ruin my life either. And it got to the point with us where we just couldn't do certain things well. So we had to kind of get some discipling, get some help, and figure out, okay, how can we best serve? But our heart was always to serve. It's just you got to figure out what's the best way to serve. And I'll just say about interdependence. The best example I can think of was very early on when not even sure Maureen was a disciple yet. We went over to Gary and Gail Knutson, who studied the Bible with us. We went over to their little, nothing fancy apartment. They lived over near Northeastern University in Boston. And there was nothing really gourmet about the dinner. It was about what I saw. And really what I saw in Gary and Gail was two people that were submitting to one another out of reverence for Christ. It was a submissive relationship. I had never seen that. I had never seen a husband and wife working together like they were working together, just in conversation, in serving the dinner, in talk, just trying to help us. I was very impressed with that. I thought, wow, this is really different. This is not like any relationship I've ever seen in the world. Right. And that's so impressed me. So I think a lot of times we forget the impact we have on non-Christians and even younger Christians and younger marrieds by just being disciples and just being hospitable. I can't tell you how much I just can't emphasize how much I was impressed by that dinner. And that was, I don't know, 39 years ago, 38 years ago. So just want to kind of come in for a landing here, summarize what we're talking about. Mutuality is teamwork. Two individuals making an informed decision to combine their varied talents, strengths, and weaknesses to produce a relationship that brings glory to God. There will be times of both great joy, deep sorrow, and disappointment, along with, of course, the average day. It's not every day you're up and down. There's a lot of average days in there, hopefully. The victories are based upon the strength of the commitment to God and each other. We need Jesus involved in our marriages through his word, his spirit, and his church. His kingdom on earth is relying upon us, the marrieds, to shine like stars in this dark world. We can succeed if we form a team with Jesus leading the way. That's all we got. Steve and Maria, did you want to say something?
Sure.
Great job.
Great job, guys. Thanks for sharing. Appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Yeah, you can go ahead and stop the recording. That would be fine.